I'm in show business, yes? Why come to me?
Well, I'll tell you why, Mr. Morse. 5440 or 5, what does that mean?
It's a slogan. It's from the...
Remember the Maine.
Yeah, that's gotta be from...
Tippecanoe and Tyler, too.
No, that's not...
They're war slogans, Mr. Morse. We remember the slogans, we can't even remember wars. You know why?
Why?
It's show business. That's why we're here.
I see.
Naked girl, covered in napalm. V for victory. 5 Marines raising the flag. Mount Suribachi. You remember the picture 50 years from now, you'll have forgotten the war.
True.
The Gulf War, smart bomb falling down a chimney, 2,500 missions a day, 100 days. One video of one bomb, Mr. Morse. The American people bought that war. War is show business. That's why we're here.
And what do you do for the president? Why Albania?
Why not?
They gotta know at some point.
Who?
Who? The public.
They gotta know?
Yes.
Stan, get with it. Who killed Kennedy? I read the first draft of the Warren report. It says he was killed by a drunk driver. You watch the Gulf War. What do you see day after day? The one smart bomb falling down a chimney. The truth? I was in the building when we shot that shot. We shot it in a studio, Falls Church, Virginia, 1/10 scale model of a building.
Is that true?
So we know. You take my point?
Yes. All right. Okay. And you want me to do what?
We want you to produce.
You want me to produce your war?
Not a war. It's a pageant. We need a theme, a song, some visuals. We need, it's a pageant. It's like the Oscars. That's why we came to you.
I have certain rules I live by. My first rule, I don't believe anything the government tells me. Nothing. Zero. And I gotta tell you folks, I don't get all choked up about yellow ribbons and American flags. I consider them to be symbols, and I leave symbols to the symbol-minded.
What we've got here is failure to communicate. Some men you just can't reach. So you get what we had here last week, which is the way he wants it. Well, he gets it.
We are continuing our coverage of a new and deadly infectious disease.
The virus has some genetic elements of the Nipah virus.
The care of these patients requires extraordinary effort.
We cannot and will not voluntarily take patients from other hospitals.
The creation and intentional release of the Clade X virus.
The impact of not doing something has lots of consequences.
We can't retreat from the rest of the world.
Continuity of government here cannot be overestimated.
A federal quarantine of this scale is unprecedented.
The question everywhere, when will there be a vaccine?
We have got to engage the private sector.
They know that we don't have a vaccine yet. They want vaccines to be prioritized.
I would not want to pull those people back.
And we need on the ground to be able to assure protection of our first responders.
This is a non-starter. I'm going to need these people. I got this feeling in a whole lot of other places.
More than 40 countries are reporting outbreaks, and many more are suspected of having cases.
Leadership requires doing things that are oftentimes unpopular.
This issue has the amazing capacity to be number 11 on anybody's list of 10 most important items.
We have been unbelievably weakened by this crisis.
What the world will look like when it's done is still very uncertain.
Okay, this is a simulation called Clyde X, and it's a simulation of the coronavirus scenario. It was recorded back 2 years ago, and they talk about the president being in critical condition from the virus, as well as the vice president and the Speaker of the House taking over. Very strange, very dramatic figures and everything, but this is a simulation that's similar to Event 201. There'll be links in the description field. I also want you to notice that in the scenario, the initial vaccine doesn't work, okay? That's important for us to realize with the push of the vaccine. The first vaccine won't work. But let's pay attention to what happens with the president.
We're going to jump ahead 10 months to July 2019.
"20 months into one of the worst pandemics the world's ever known, there's still no vaccine to protect people. Hard figures are impossible to come by, but the World Health Organization estimates that 150 million people have died. That's approximately 2% of the global population. For industrial countries, the death rate's a bit lower, but in many low and middle-income countries, the death rate's much higher. As many as 30% of the seriously ill have died. In the U.S., there have been an estimated 82 million severe cases and 15 million deaths. At least 5 million Clade X deaths happened because adequate medical care wasn't available. No doubt, millions of others will have died prematurely from heart attacks, strokes, cancer, and the like. The U.S., along with the rest of the world, is in its worst economic depression in history. The Dow Jones Industrial Average is down 90%, the GDP down 50%, and unemployment is running at 20%. Unemployment would be higher if not for the dramatic shrinkage of the available workforce due to death and disability. The U.S. is in a constitutional crisis. The president remains in critical condition, and while the vice president is out of intensive care, he remains unable to assume his constitutional duties. Therefore, the Speaker of the House is the acting president. Continuity of government is a major concern. 1/3 of the U.S. Congress is dead or incapacitated, as are 2 members of the Supreme Court and senior members of the administration. Government functioning at the federal, state, and local levels has been brought to a near halt. After the failure of the first vaccine that seemed so promising 15 months ago, along with several other candidates, we now see fresh optimism. The Omega vaccine, which has finally been shown to be safe and effective, is just starting to be deployed as fast as it can be manufactured and distributed. 1/3 of Americans are expected to have access to the vaccine in the next 6 to 8 months. Global vaccine distribution and dispensing, which is an enormous undertaking in the best of circumstances, has been slowed in many locations by riots and looting at vaccination sites. Infectious disease specialists seem to agree that once 80% of the people have been vaccinated, the epidemic should be brought under control with an ultimate 20 million deaths in the U.S. These same infectious disease specialists say we're lucky because the virus is similar in some ways to common para-influenza viruses, and only 1 dose of vaccine is needed. The situation in most of the rest of the world is much worse. Massive loss of life, economic collapse, famine, and civil unrest. There's been a mass exodus from cities, adding to the spread of the disease and making vaccination programs even more difficult. The nagging question: what would have happened if we had a vaccine many months earlier? If the first vaccine had worked and started to be deployed at 6 months into the pandemic, the U.S. death toll could have been reduced from an anticipated 20 million to 6 million, with similar reductions in economic and societal consequences. On the other hand, what if years go by without a vaccine? Then, experts tell us that we could eventually see 30 to 40 million deaths in the U.S., and more than 900 million around the world, 12% of the global population. Eventually, once almost everyone's been exposed, the disease will either burn itself out or become endemic, like the dreaded childhood diseases of prior centuries. What the world will look like when it's done is still very uncertain.
Later in the exercise, they imply that the president goes away and then comes back, which you can hear at this point right here. So he goes away due to the virus.
That plan also has to have a leader. We have to have somebody who's in charge, and we throughout this whole exercise, I don't think we had a leader. And we had a president intermittently coming back.
As a follow-up to my last video posted this past Wednesday, I want to quote from this news item from Politico. The United States is headed toward the worst post-election crisis in a century and a half. Our biggest concern is that a disputed presidential election could generate violence and bloodshed. We are not being alarmist about the potential for violence. Trends in public opinion that we've been tracking provide strong grounds for concern. Our research, which we're reporting here for the first time, shows an upswing in the past few months in the number of Democrats and Republicans who said that they think violence would be justified if their side loses the upcoming presidential election. This growing acceptance of the possibility of violence is a bipartisan movement. Our data shows that the willingness of Democrats and Republicans alike to justify violence as a way to achieve political goals has essentially been rising in lockstep. Late last year, our research determined that there is an uptick in the number of respondents saying they would condone violence by their own political party. And we decided to combine our data sets to get as much information as possible on this worrisome trend. We were also monitoring another question. Would you condone violence if the other party's candidate wins the presidential election? Here's what we've found. Among Americans who identify as Democrat or Republican, 1 in 3 now believe that violence could be justified to advance their party's political goals. Only 3 years ago, just 8% of Americans said that violence could be justified. That number is now 4 times greater in only 3 years, from 2017 until now. How seriously should we take these expressions of violence? History warns us to take them very seriously. In Europe in the 1920s and 1930s, a rising tide of armed street fights between rival partisans ravaged democratic cultures, bullied and marginalized moderate forces, and gave rising autocrats an excuse to seize emergency powers. Those who have studied the rise of authoritarians see strong parallels between that period of European history and factors at work in America today. Furthermore, violent events tend to increase public approval of political violence, potentially creating a vicious cycle. Viewed in this light, the events of this past summer are especially worrying. Competing protesters from the right and left have clashed violently in Portland, Oregon, Kenosha, Wisconsin, and Louisville, Kentucky. Left-wing extremists have repeatedly laid siege to federal buildings in Portland, and on several occasions, armed right-wing protesters occupied the state capitol building in Michigan. Several possible scenarios could trigger unprecedented post-election violence. Biden could surge from behind on election night to win on the strength of mail-in ballots that Trump has already dismissed as fraud-ridden, prompting Trump's supporters to feel the election was stolen from him. Should some Republican-controlled legislatures seek to throw out mail-in ballots wholesale and give their state's electoral college votes to Trump, regardless of the final vote count, Democrats and others would be outraged. There could also be intense anger on the left if Trump once again wins re-election by losing the popular vote but winning by narrow margins in states that give him an electoral college victory. Donald Trump's remarks and tweets have been encouraging violence by his supporters, intensified by the president's comments during this week's debate, urging the Proud Boys, a militant right-wing group that has been active in recent street protests, to stand back and stand by. Everyone in a position of leadership in a political party, the Congress, or the White House has an obligation to renounce violence and explicitly dissuade their followers from turning to violent tactics or threats. However, we are now headed into such a severe downward spiral of partisan polarization that we cannot rely on candidates and campaigns to pull us out of it. We do not sound this alarm lightly. So that ends my quote from this article in Politico. Brothers and sisters, this civil war over this election result, it's coming. It's coming next month. So I urge you to be in prayer and have no part in this political war. Our hope is only in Jesus.
I never one of those.
I want to start with the first Gulf War in Iraq 27 years ago, since this is probably the best example of just how low the establishment are willing to sink in order to further their selfish agendas. Now, as usual, the so-called elite were trying to convince the civilian population to go to war, but most people were unwilling. That, however, literally changed overnight when the world heard the horrific testimony of a young Kuwaiti girl named Naira.
I was the youngest volunteer. The other women were from 20 to 30 years old. While I was there, I saw the Iraqi soldiers come into the hospital with guns. They took the babies out of the incubators. Took the incubators and left the children to die on the cold floor. It was horrifying.
This truly shocking story of Iraqi soldiers ruthlessly killing innocent babies quickly spread around the globe.
Pulled from incubators and scattered like firewood across the floor.
And they had kids in incubators, and they were thrown out of the incubators so that Kuwait could be systematically dismantled.
Rip babies from their incubators in Kuwait.
Even Amnesty International cited Naira's haunting testimony to back up the claim that more than 300 babies were mercilessly murdered at the hands of the Iraqi government. There was just one problem with the teenage girl's testimony. The whole thing was a fabricated lie.
Then a rather embarrassed Amnesty retracted its report. In London, spokesman Sean Stiles said, as hard as they tried, they could not confirm it.
We spoke to well over a dozen doctors of different nationalities who had been in Kuwait at the time, and they couldn't stand the story up, and it became quite clear to us that credible medical opinion was that this didn't happen.
And it wasn't just Amnesty International. The story did not hold up under repeated scrutiny by reporters and human rights investigators, including Andrew Whitley, executive director of the human rights group Middle East Watch.
You went to investigate.
Yes, we did.
You went to Saudi, and then after liberation of Kuwait, you went to Kuwait.
Correct.
What did you find?
We went straight to the hospitals. We were particularly concerned with going to the maternity hospital at the Al Sabah complex. This is the largest hospital in the country, and it's a hospital that has perhaps a half to two-thirds of all the incubators in the country.
Did Iraqi soldiers remove babies from incubators?
No, they did not. Not at all.
So what the hell really happened? And who was Naira? Well, it turns out that this not-so-innocent teenage girl was really a part of the Kuwaiti royal family and the daughter of the Kuwaiti foreign ambassador to the United States. And her Academy Award-winning testimony that she gave was actually thanks to the coaching she had received from a massive public relations firm named Hill & Knowlton, a company with very close ties to the US government.
Craig Fuller, who until last week was president of Hill & Knowlton, was George Bush's chief of staff when he was vice president.
I was involved in President Bush's campaign. I've also been involved in President Reagan's campaign, and this was like a campaign in every sense of the word.
He needed no introduction to the administration.
My relationships there kind of continue, even having left the government, and I think almost spontaneously, as the Kuwaitis were talking to us, we were also talking to the people in the administration to find out how we could be supportive with respect to the president's program.
The program was to go to war.
Now, as unbelievably unethical and psychopathic as this all is, it's not an isolated incident, guys. With the Vietnam War, which began over 60 years ago, the government made the claim that they had been attacked and used this as a justification to go to war. We now know today that once again, these were nothing but lies.
Was there anything to shoot at out there?
No, I don't. I'm certain that there was not anything to shoot at right from the beginning.
And events afterwards showed that our judgment that we'd been attacked that day was wrong. It didn't happen.
In the more recent Iraq War, we were told over and over and over again that the Iraqi government had weapons of mass destruction.
The United States knows that Iraq has weapons of mass destruction.
There is no doubt that Saddam Hussein now has weapons of mass destruction.
And they were closely allied with Al-Qaeda.
Saddam Hussein aids and protects terrorists, including members of Al-Qaeda.
And again today, after all the destruction has already been caused and cannot be reversed, we know this was all bullshit lies.
The time was we thought he had weapons of mass destruction. It turns out he didn't.
It appears that there were not weapons of mass destruction there.
You said you knew where they were.
I did not. We know where they are. They're in the area around Tikrit and Baghdad and east, west, south, and north somewhat.
You said you knew where they were, near Tikrit, near Baghdad, and north, east, south, and west of there. Those are your words.
My words were, we know where they are. They're in the area around Tikrit and Baghdad and east, west, south.
The claim that Iraq was sponsoring terrorists who had attacked us on 9/11 turned out to be false.
I don't think we ever said, at least I know I didn't say, that there was a direct connection between September the 11th and Saddam Hussein. Saddam Hussein aids and protects terrorists, including members of Al-Qaeda.
And what about the Libyan war just a few years ago? They claimed this was purely a humanitarian intervention.
Humanitarian assistance.
Humanitarian relief. Humanitarian assistance.
Humanitarian and economic assistance.
And that they were intervening to stop a massacre.
We have intervened to stop a massacre.
Well, today, thanks to the exposition of Hillary Clinton's emails and an investigation conducted by the British government's House of Commons, we once again know that these were agenda-driven lies. Even more disturbing than this criminal deception is the fact that the US government and their allies openly supported terrorist fighters. Most notably, Abdul Hakim al-Assidi and Abdul Hakim Balhaj, members of an organization called the Libyan Islamic Fighting Group, an organization that was internationally recognized before, during, and after the war by the United States, the United Kingdom, and the United Nations as an officially proscribed terrorist group. Yet in spite of this incontestable fact, and even after Abdul Hakim al-Assidi admitted openly to the mainstream media that his fighters had links to Al-Qaeda, they still supported them.
There's a Al-Qaeda flag flying over the courthouse in Benghazi in Libya, put there by the same group that we helped to oust the Gaddafi regime. What is going on in America? On one hand, we have soldiers dying in Afghanistan fighting Al-Qaeda. On the other hand, we just helped a group of people take over Libya, and the Al-Qaeda flag is flying over their capital city headquarters. What are we doing? It's time for America to get its story and its priorities straight about what we stand for as a nation.
It comes as no surprise then that today, Libya, which once enjoyed the highest standard of living in all of Africa under Gaddafi, is now a failed state and the country has degraded into chaos. And now this same methodology is being used in Syria.
Allies to provide humanitarian support.
Humanitarian efforts.
Delivery of humanitarian aid. We're providing humanitarian assistance.
Providing humanitarian relief to the Syrian people.
And thanks to declassified documents, not only do we know that they've been once again supporting terrorists, but they literally helped facilitate the rise of ISIS.
The report is from 2012, and specifically, it explains the dangers of what the U.S. government is doing in Syria at the time. Remember, in 2012, ISIS, as we know them today, did not exist. Page 3 of those leaked pages state 3 facts about the situation in Syria. A, internally, events are taking a clear sectarian direction. B, the Salafists, the Muslim Brotherhood, and AQI, or Al-Qaeda in Iraq, are the major forces driving the insurgency in Syria. And C, the West. Gulf countries and Turkey, they support the opposition, while Russia, China, and Iran support the regime. Now stay with me, because if you don't know the term Salafist, that movement is an ultra-conservative Orthodox movement within Sunni Islam. The doctrine is summed up as taking a fundamentalist approach to Islam. Sound familiar? Salafist is the same belief system as Wahhabism, from which ISIS draws their radical, violent, merciless beliefs. So now let's go back to that document. Because after reading page 5 in section 8C, the Department of Defense warns this, quote, if the situation unravels, there is a possibility of establishing a declared or undeclared Salafist principality in eastern Syria. And this is exactly what the supporting powers to the opposition want in order to isolate the Syrian regime, which is considered a strategic depth of Shia expansion in Iraq and Iran.
Yet in spite of this documented evidence, and even after these Western-backed terrorists beheaded a 12-year-old boy on camera, the government and mainstream media insist on calling them rebels.
Obviously, the United States government denies providing any sort of help to the terrorist groups that you're talking about. They say they provide help for the rebel groups. Tell us more about...
The reality is, Jake, the reality is, and I'm glad you brought up that point, because this is an often talked about thing by people like Adam Kinzinger and others saying, well, we've got to support the moderate rebels. Every place that I went, every person that I spoke to, I asked this question to them. And without hesitation, they said, there are no moderate rebels. Who are these moderate rebels that people keep speaking of? Regardless of the name of these groups, the strongest fighting force on the ground in Syria is al-Nusra, or Al-Qaeda, and ISIS. That is a fact. There's a number of different other groups. All of them essentially are fighting alongside, with, or under the command of the strongest group on the ground that's trying to overthrow us.
And what about the first chemical weapons attack in 2013? The Obama administration claimed they knew for a fact that the Assad regime did it.
The facts cannot be denied. We know the Assad regime was responsible.
But later on, we found out that this was another unsurprising lie.
That the most radical jihadi, if you will, opposition group, rebel group, al-Nusra, we're talking about serious Salafists, Wahhabis, what you will, had access to sarin. There was a lot of intelligence reporting about it. The White House can say anything they want about it, but that is a fact that they had access to sarin. So when the incident took place, the one thing they didn't do is they didn't consider the possibility that al-Nusra could have been one of the people that involved. They went right away to the notion that it had to be Bashar, and the world's press went with them, including the American press, and in fact, they didn't have much of a case.
So why should we trust this criminal government now? When you have a history of compulsive lying, of course you lose credibility in my book.
I believe the best path to a more peaceful world are proud, independent, and sovereign nations that serve and respect their own people. When you look at what's going on in the world, you have so many where they don't respect their people. But we want nations that cooperate together to create better for all people. That's what we're all about, all people. And we can't have madmen out there shooting rockets all over the place. And by the way, Rocket Man should have been handled a long time ago. Little Rocket Man. We're going to do it because we really have no choice. And I want to tell you something, and I'm sure he's listening because he watches every word, and I guarantee you one thing, he's watching us like he never watched anybody before.
This is the first time any North Korean leader has directly addressed an international audience. Kim Jong-un saying he takes President Trump's threats personally, so he has been rattled, but he's now rattling the world with a new threat of his own, of a nuclear test explosion over the Pacific.
반드시
From North Korea, a unique threat, and from Kim Jong-un, a first message in English, vowing to make President Trump, quote, pay dearly, calling him a mentally deranged dotard or senile old man, that word now trending online, for threatening to destroy North Korea in his UN speech Tuesday.
Rocket Man is on a suicide mission for himself.
Calling that a personal insult, Kim said Trump was a rogue and a gangster who's playing with fire. His foreign minister adding more fuel to the fire, threatening to test a hydrogen bomb over the Pacific Ocean. Kim saying Trump's threats have now convinced him his nuclear weapons are necessary. The war of words is deepening, sanctions escalating. President Trump ordering new ones.
North Korea's nuclear weapons and missile development is a grave threat to peace and security in our world.
The president also praising China.
I want to just say and thank President Xi of China for
ordering its banks to stop business with North Korea. But sanctions haven't stopped North Korea's nuclear tests, conducting its 6th and largest this month.
And we're not going to run scared. If, for any reason, North Korea attacks the United States or our allies, the U.S. will respond, period.
Talks seem remote, though President Trump isn't closing the door.
Is dialogue still possible?
Thank you.
But a nuclear threat in the Pacific has raised this crisis to a new and dangerous level. And that war of words escalating this morning with President Trump tweeting, Kim Jong-un, who's obviously a madman who doesn't mind starving or killing his people, will be tested like never before.
Now, again, as we said, we're not sure what caused this. It could possibly, and we emphasize possibly, have been a ground impact of a Scud. It could have been a ground impact of a Patriot, or it could have been the result of debris falling between the two of them. We just don't know right now, but we do know that at least 2 Scud missiles incoming were fired at Riyadh, and according to the Saudi military, they were both shot down. Charles Jaco, CNN, reporting live from Saudi Arabia. Was almost exactly 2 hours ago when the sirens went off here in Saudi Arabia. Where we are in eastern Saudi Arabia, there was no problem. However, there was an intercept elsewhere near the capital city, Riyadh. We've got some videotape of that you can take a look at right now. Hi, Atlanta. We're about to have a short course in missile identification. This is a Scud. You can tell it by its distinctive label. Now, when the missile is launched, the first thing you look for is the plume sticking out behind it. Now, when you detect this, you can tell it's been launched. Thank you.
Graffiti on it? Yeah, show me graffiti.
Larry King show or bust. Look at this.
Look at
this. Look at this shit. Look at.
Believe that. Let me say hi.
The top 10 things about Saudi Arabia. Maybe we could shorten the list to 5. Oh God, Geopolitics by Dan Quayle. Je suis un journaliste américain. Wolf.
Woof.
Wolf. Oh, I love this country so much.
You guys just don't have a clue.
Well, Cheryl, it was almost exactly 2 hours ago when the sirens went off here in Saudi Arabia. Where we are in eastern Saudi Arabia, there was no problem. Now, let me just size my mask and fit it for a second, just like I always do. Stand by. All clear. They're... Shh. What are they saying? Are they saying all clear?
Yes, ma'am. I can't hear.
Were they saying all clear down there just now?
I can't hear it. Understand. Okay.
All clear. All clear. Está bien was a false alarm. Got that, Atlanta? Standing down now. I'm gonna go get my hamburger and my coffee.
Good. We just got the all clear.
All clear. Every time I order something, this happens. All clear. Thank you.
Yeah. Jesus Christ.
I'm starting to get real bothered by all this.
You ready?
Boy, did I almost look stupid.
In any of these
Scott, you're concerned about chemicals is certainly well taken. I've been through, at least 3 or 4 briefing classes.
Gentlemen?
Both the American military and the NATO military on this.
Gentlemen.
Carl, yes.
Excuse me for breaking in. Charles Jaco, Carl Rosell.
Without Derek Zoolander, male modeling wouldn't be what it is today.
Actually, hiring Eddie was my idea from the beginning.
Excuse me, where's the lobby?
Down the hall and to the left.
Thanks.
McDonald is here, live on Monday Night Raw. Hey, look at this! Donald Trump! Donald Trump! Donald Trump taking down Vince McMahon! Oh my God! The hostile takeover of Donald Trump on Vince McMahon has happened at WrestleMania 23. I didn't think he would do it!
Okay, kids, make it fast. I've got a plane to catch.
We've created a magazine. Mr. Trump, we give you Scotty.
We are not merely transferring power from one administration to another, or from one party to another, but we are transferring power from Washington, D.C., and giving it back to you, the people.
And we give it back to you, the people.
For too long, a small group in our nation's capital
are corrupt,
has reaped the rewards of government,
the rich,
while the people have borne the cost.
The oppressors of generations who have kept you down with myths of opportunity.
The establishment protected itself, but not the citizens of our country.
And do you accept the resignation of all of these liars, of all the corrupt?
That all changes, starting right here and right now, because this moment is your moment. It belongs to you.
None shall interfere. Do as you please.
January 20th, 2017 will be remembered as the day the people became the rulers of this nation again. The United States of America.
It will endure.
You know, I've been hearing more and more about a thing called fake news. Fake news. I've seen people destroyed, and I think it's very unfair. Some of the media outlets that I deal with are fake news. Fake news. I think it's a disgrace, an absolute disgrace, but I don't think they care. Well, first of all, one of the reasons I'm here today is to tell you the whole Russian thing, that's a ruse. It's a ruse. I own nothing in Russia. I don't have any deals in Russia. Russia is fake news. I just see many, many untruthful things. The press has become so dishonest. The public doesn't believe you people anymore. You have a lower approval rate than Congress. You know, I've been hearing more and more about a thing called fake news. Fake news. I've seen people destroyed, and I think it's very unfair. Some of the media outlets that I deal with are fake news. Fake news. I think it's a disgrace, an absolute disgrace, but I don't think they care. I'll tell you something, I don't mind bad stories. I can handle a bad story better than anybody as long as it's true. But I'm not okay when it is fake. It's all fake news. I mean, it's story after story after story. We're not gonna let it happen again. The public gets it. When I go to rallies, they want to throw their placards to CNN. Here's the thing. I want to see an honest press. I want to see an honest press. I want to see an honest press. It's so important to see an honest press. I want to see an honest press. I want to see an honest press. But our nation's reporters will not tell you the truth. So I'll go over just some of them. MSNBC. You are fake news. The New York Times. You are fake news. CBS, NBC, ABC, BBC, LA Times. You are fake news. The Washington Post. You are fake news. CNN. Very fake news. Politico, AP, HuffPo, BuzzFeed. Failing pile of garbage. And I've been hearing more and more about a thing called fake news. Fake news. I've seen people destroyed, and I think it's very unfair. Some of the media outlets that I deal with are fake news. Fake news. I think it's a disgrace, an absolute disgrace, but I don't think they care.